Welcome everyone to the World Blitz Championship quarterfinals. This is the fourth and last game. Results so far is 1.5 versus 1.5. So this could be a decisive game. Hans Niemann facing Magnus Carlsen, and Hans going for an Italian opening, the Gioco piano variation. He goes for a3, which covers g4 and also gives some pressure to the white king. Magnus copies him with a move pawn to h6. And now Hans goes for c3. He has two ideas. The first one is to push d4 in the near future, or you can also go for a queenside expansion with the move pawn to b4, attacking the bishop on c5. Rook to e1. You want to push d4, then e4 needs to be protected. Magnus goes for the prophylactic move pawn to a6. Now you got some space for the bishop on the a7 square, and now knight b to d2, the usual regroupment for the knight. This knight usually comes to f1 and later to g3. Look at the bodyguard over there with the green hoodie, holding the audience so they cannot jump over the board, but also he cannot resist the temptation of looking back to see what's going on the board. Now Hans is probably going for knight to g3, right? And Magnus goes for bishop e6, fighting the Italian bishop. So the bishops are traded. Rook takes e6. And probably the most natural move now is to push d4, right? After d4, Hans is actually threatening to win the game immediately with a fork on d5. So now Magnus has two options. Either to go for d5 and then the center actually explodes, or you can actually remove the rook from e6. Probably the most natural square for the rook is actually e8. If you go to e7, then knight f5 comes with a tempo. Remember, the time control is 3+2. If you are liking this kind of content, please subscribe to our channel. Rook to e8 from the Viking of chess, the Ragnar Lothbrok of chess. Magnus Carlsen, now bishop e3, completing development. Now pawn takes e4. You're actually forced to take back with the bishop, otherwise e4 could be hanging. And now if the bishop takes d4, Magnus has two options to capture this bishop on d4. You can actually take with a knight, or you can also take that bishop with the a7 bishop. In any case, the c file could be open actually for a white rook. The rook on c1 could be putting some pressure against the c7 pawn. Magnus' main problem here is the lack of space. This pawn on e4 is actually doing a great job. And, it's not that easy, to play here with the black pieces. And Magnus suffering as well on the clock, right? 1 minute and 40 seconds for the world champion Hans Niemann with almost 3 minutes on the clock. So how are you going to take Magnus? Knight takes d4, c takes d4, or bishop takes d4. After bishop takes d4, c d4, I think the knight on c6 is pretty clumsy. So he decides to take with the knight, c takes d4, and c6 extremely fast, stopping d5 ideas from white, followed by knight d4 and knight f5. Hans goes for queen to b3, putting pressure against the pawn on b7. You got to protect that guy on b7. You got two options, either with the rook or with the queen. Rook b8 and then rook a to d1. All white pieces are extremely well coordinated. Now Hans Niemann is dreaming with bringing a knight to f5, but at this point it's actually not possible because e4 is not well protected. So maybe you need to waste a tempo by bringing the queen to d3 or to c2 to jump to f5. Rook e6. Magnus is probably planning to double heavy pieces on the e-file, or maybe even try to triple heavy pieces on the e-file to put tremendous pressure against e4. And Hans goes for queen to c2, overprotecting e4. Now Hans is ready to bring this knight to f5 to the party. This knight on f5 is extremely dangerous against the black king. You got plenty of sacrifices against g7, against h6 in the near future. So you gotta stop that knight f5. And the only way to do is to play g6. Of course, you don't want to do that because you are weakening a little bit more the black king, but Magnus has to go for that. And then queen c1, putting more pressure against the pawn on h6. The Norwegian has to protect that pawn by bringing the king to g7 or h7. And now Hans Niemann transferring the queen to f4, bringing more pieces to the party. Actually, many interesting ideas now for Hans Niemann. h4, h5 trying to open some lines over there, or maybe even knight to h4 in order to sacrifice a knight on f5, bring the other knight to f5, and why not, bring the queen to h6 with checkmate. Queen e7, knight h4. It's actually threatening to win the game immediately with knight f5. King h7, nice move from Magnus Carlsen. After knight f5, you can just take and then play queen f8, protecting the pawn on h6. So Hans goes back to f3, rook e8, and now he plays pawn to e5. But look at this knight on d5 from Magnus Carlsen. That knight on d5 is actually fantastic. Everybody wants a selfie with this knight on d5. He's got 1 million followers on Instagram. He got a six-pack last year. He's so handsome, but at the same time, very intelligent, getting his PhD in how to block an isolated pawn at the MIT last year. Dr. Horsey. So queen to g4, pawn takes e5, and then rook takes e5. So still a lot of pieces on the king side, attacking the black king. Magnus is very low on time, less than 1 minute in the clock. So bishop e8, I really love that move because it's actually forcing some trades. And then if we reach an endgame, then the knight on d5 is actually making a difference. And also the pawn structure. Rook takes e6, queen takes e6. And now Hans Niemann, he doesn't want to trade queens. He's going to go to h4, right? It's actually a very interesting square, because after queen h4, you're actually threatening to go for knight to g5 using the pin along the h file, right? So queen h4 is played by Hans, then queen e7. Very smart move from Magnus Carlsen, because if you go to g4, which is the only available square, then f5 traps the queen. So this is forcing white to take on e7. And, this is the kind of position where the massage specialist company, Magnus Carlsen and Associates, starts to do its work slowly, gently, making you suffer, but at the same time, making you enjoy it. Bishop e7. Now try to put pressure against the isolated pawn, king f1. The rook has to go back to e7. Now black probably, to win this game, has to put tremendous pressure against d4. And there we go. Magnus recycling the knight. He always cares about the environment. Rook to d7. Now the pressure comes. So that's why Hans Niemann has to go passive with knight to c2. Every Hans Niemann piece protecting d4. Now Magnus Carlsen starts grabbing space on the king side with a move king to f6. There is a nice plan in this position, which is g5 followed by g4, deflecting the knight from f3, king d3. That smells really bad for Hans Niemann, since after c5 there is actually tremendous pressure against d4, and it's extremely tough now to protect that guy on d4. How are you gonna do, Hans? What are you gonna do here? C takes d4 is just coming, just winning a free pawn in this position. So probably king to c3, looks like the only reasonable move to protect the pawn on d4. But then after pawn takes e4, knight takes d4, the knight on d4 is actually pinned, since the rook on d1 is not protected. Knight to d5. Wow, what a move by the Norwegian. Now with a double threat, threatening the pawn on h3, but even more important, threatening to go knight e4. And then the coffee guy just passes by. Bring me some frappuccino from Starbucks. I need some more sugar, my man, to keep doing commentary on this fantastic game. How are you gonna parry both threats? Hans, knight e4 is actually very, very dangerous. So rook f1, you take on h3, f4 is probably the idea. Trapping the knight, knight e4, just going for the check, king to d3. The knight on d4 is extremely shaky, but there's not a way to take that knight. Knight c5 check, king e2, down knight a5. Wow, double threat once again, intended to capture on d4 and also on b2. Knight f3, rook e7 check, king d2. That's a free foot on b2, free pawn for Magnus Carlsen. Knight d5 is actually a threat, so you need to cover that square. Rook d7 check, intermediate move, knight a4. The dancing of the horses, check on a4. Now the knight cuts back to c5. And this is a free pawn from Magnus Carlsen, but still not decided. Very long time. Then a region, knight to e6. The rook on f1 is actually a slave of the f2 pawn. So you need to move the f2 pawn in order to move the rook from f1. Magnus keeps grabbing space on the king side. f3. Now Hans trying to move the rook. Bishop b8. Fantastic move, provoking g4. And now you got a fantastic, tasty square on f4 for the knight. Intended to grab the h3 pawn. Bishop to e5. Bishop on e5. e5 really controlling every part of the board. Is the most hands-on guy in class. Rook c7 trying to activate rook along the third rank. There you go. Rook c3 attacking the knight. Rook f3, 2 extra pawns for the Viking of chess. Knight to c5, but now Hans Niemann counter-attacking, looking to get some pawns on the queen side. Check on d7, check back on c5, king f7. Give me that pawn, baby, on f5, king f6. Nobody can protect the pawn on f5. So now Magnus Carlsen is starting to run on the king side. King f5, rook b7, a5, knight c6, stacking the bishop. Check on the 7 drag, bishop f6, rook b5. Now threatening son. Discover moves, knight to e4, attacking the bishop. The bishop has to move, bishop to g7. Give me that pawn, baby, on a5. Rook to b2. Now Magnus is probably trying to trade some pieces. There you go, minimizing risks. Knight c3 check. They already trade a couple of minor pieces. Attacking the rook on a5. You need to move the rook. Rook c5, bishop f6. Wow, the bishop doing a tremendous job, controlling the knight on c6. The bishop is also better placed than the knight when there is pawn on both flanks. This is a race now. You gotta run like a beast. Knight to b4. You gotta move the rook, otherwise, white can take it. Rook a4, attacking the knight. There's the check with 1 second in the clock. Into f3 from Magnus Carlsen. Rook c6, attacking the bishop. Takes on b4. Once again, simplifying the position. But now Magnus' job is too easy. He needs to bring the rook behind the pawn and then run like a beast. Rook a1. The a6 pawn is just stopped. Now h3, h2 is coming. King to b2, h3 followed by h2. And Hans Niemann resigns. What an exciting game. I've never seen Magnus Carlsen so nervous and shaking even his hands. Look at that move with the king. He almost punched through the board. They had her ups and downs in the past, and there was clearly a lot at stake between these super players. Wow, see you in the next video, guys. Hope you enjoyed.